Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm Donald Grodoff, family coach with FamilyOCD.com and FocusedHealthyFamily.com. In the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast series, I delve into the hidden characteristics of OCD, anxiety, and anxiety disorders, the things that most people don't see, that are behind closed doors and shut within the mind about anxiety. My goal with these podcasts is to bring about awareness of obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. Understand that I am not a doctor, therapist, or counselor, and the content, information, resources, and ideas that are talked about and brought up here in these podcasts are things that I have used, discovered, or have been recommended to me, and I always recommend to seek additional professional help in finding solutions for yourself. Thank you for listening and enjoy the podcast. This podcast was recorded April 9th, 2019. This is podcast number 28, called Sensorimotor Obsessions. In this podcast, I wanted to talk about something that just recently kind of came across my desk, an article about something that I'd never heard of before. And it's called Sensorimotor Obsessions. And it's highly linked to OCD, very similar in actions. And a lot of people do classify it with OCD, even though when they talk about it, it is related to other obsessive compulsive actions or things. So let me read the definition that Dr. Kuhler puts in here. Sensorimotor obsessions, as defined here, involved either a focus on automatic bodily processes or discrete physical sensations. So in other words, things that happen automatically, I think they're called involuntary actions of the body, blinking of the eye, swallowing, breathing, even sensations of touch and different things like that, or sensations of things happening within your body are all kind of classified in this. The more common terms he talks about here are obsessive swallowing or obsessive blinking or conscious breathing. And he talks about in a typical scenario, individuals begin to selectively attend to their swallowing, for example, and become anxious that they will become unable to stop thinking about their swallowing. Because he talks about the fact that, like most OCD obsessions, can be harmful, can be really dark, worried about being harmed or harming someone, somebody dying, something bad happening to someone. In this particular case, the obsession really becomes this thought that, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to not pay attention to my eyes blinking or swallowing or whatever. I'm never going to be able to stop thinking about this. And it causes anxiety because there's a fear of always having to think about it very consciously, which isn't the way it's supposed to happen, of course. So let me read some of the examples of what some common sensorimotor obsessions are. The first one is breathing. Whether it be shallow or deep, you just focus on the sensation of breathing. Blinking, how often I blink, or the physical, what it takes to actually do the blinking. Swallowing or salivation, how frequently one swallows, the amount of salivation produced, or the sensation of swallowing itself. Movement of the mouth or tongue during speech, so however your tongue might go in and out, or up or down, or around, or how it feels, or how you have to open your mouth a certain way. Pulse or heartbeat, paying attention, being aware of the pulse or heartbeat, particularly at night while trying to fall asleep. Eye contact. And he says here, unlike social anxiety-based concerns, this form involves awareness of the eye contact itself, or which eye one is looking at when staring into the eyes of another person. And I've run into that before. I've seen people, and I think it sounds to me like the social anxiety part of that eye contact thing can play kind of a fine line between what they're talking about here. Visual distraction, paying attention to the floaters. I like that. I get them myself once in a while. You catch out of the corner of your eye little like particles floating in the air that aren't really there. They're just in your eye. So that they talk about that, these little drifting pieces within the eye that you sometimes, especially as I get older, I find that a little more common. But I don't stress over it. I don't worry about it or fear over it. And of course, awareness of specific body parts. They talk about here, observing as you're reading, you just really get focused on the side of your nose as your eyes go down to read the book, and just really obsessing over that the side of your nose. So those are some of the what they call the common um, obsessions that this has. Um, so um, and they talk too about in OCD you have obsessions and compulsions. With this, the compulsions really aren't much more. They're not like hand washing or cleaning something. They're really more of how to distract. How many different ways can I distract myself so I don't think about it, and just really going overboard with those distraction and playing into this. Um, so now they talk about the treatment of it, and they talk about the big part of treatment with this is to separate the emotion from the involuntary action, the blinking or whatever. I'll read how he describes it here. Decoupling any sensory awareness with the reactive anxiety. In other words, sufferers must ultimately experience their sensory hyper-awareness without resulting anxiety. So they what they talk about in here is actually well, they talk about ERP, which um, if you listen back to there's a couple I think on ERP in the podcast series that you can listen to about what ERP is. Um, and what he brings up a really an important part here and why you have to separate it. He says once a thought is linked with anxiety, the conscious mind keeps it ever present because think about the mind. It's a protective uh, being for us. It's protecting us from being hurt or injured or whatever. So if it is hooked on this thought and thinking the thought is not safe, then it's going to uh, keep it out there in front to be really keep an eye on it. It really doesn't want us to forget about this possible danger of the blinking of the eye. Um, but they talk about it, exposure response prevention, ERP therapy, which I've talked about numerous times. I believe in it wholeheartedly. Um, and here again, it's this really what they talk about is voluntarily paying attention to whatever it is you obsess over. In other words, if blinking is something that you obsess over, then instead of waiting for it to happen, you actually pay attention to it. And by doing that, you take the emphasis off of it. So it is um, ERP, and it's done very nicely. I think this would be wonderful because here it says voluntarily paying attention to the relevant bodily process or sensation. So in other words, instead of trying to distract yourself, you look dead on into it. You pay attention to it and accept that you're paying attention to it. Um, and it says to invite in any such awareness, exposure with casual, dispassionate focus. So in other words, it's not doing it, oh my God, I got to pay attention. Oh my gosh, I got to pay. No, it's just, oh, there it is. And let me just pay attention to what's going on to it, you know. And here is where I like to, with ERP, I always tie in EFT, which is my training is in emotional freedom techniques or tapping. I always tie tapping into this because in this they're talking about, also looking at the mindset that this thing has set up. Such thing as my life will be ruined because of this, or I'll never have peace of mind, or I'll never be able to get rid of this problem. You have to get past that mindset, and that's where EFT works beautifully in helping to clear that message, get rid of that message. So I like to, whenever I work with ERP, is to tie the tapping process into it. One, it speeds up the process of the recovery of through ERP, but in this particular case, it's working on the mindset. And even with OCD, there's a big mindset that needs to be changed. So, um, yeah. So then and they talk about imagining it, doing like imaginary work with it. Where you really focus on paying attention to it. You're imagining the thing happening as well as paying attention to it. And I'm talking about adding on to that tapping. I've worked vision work with tapping, and it works very well. So they also talk about body scan as a process for treatment. And what they're talking about is going through and actually, well, here I'll read it here. His definition: a body scan involves shifting attention to various bodily processes or sensation for a prescribed period of time. And what it means is that you're kind of closing your eyes, you're you're going through your body and thinking about and paying attention to each different process your body does. Any of the involuntary actions, the blinking, the swallowing, you're going from the top of your head down to the bottom of your feet or vice versa, and spending a few minutes on each one and then moving on to the next one. And it talks about by doing this, you give the mind the idea that it can move on from these when they get obsessive, you can move on because you prove it by doing that. Because here's how he says it here. Patients learn that they can move gently from one sensation to another without getting stuck by focusing and refocusing in the absence of anxiety, apprehension, or active attempts to force the shifting in awareness. So in other words, you're not forcing it, you're paying attention to it, and you're just going down the body, paying attention to what's going on. And then, of course, they talk about mindfulness, in this, the art of paying close attention to an experience in the absence of criticism, judgment, or defensiveness can also play an abundant role. To me, mindfulness is, I do that with the EFT. Mindfulness is just a matter of being really full aware and getting into yourself and being fully aware of what's going on in both in a bodily sense but in a spiritual sense, be in a heart-centered sense. What am I feeling today? What is going on for me? What, looking at any situation and being able to take it inside. Um, so in the conclusion, he states, sensorimotor obsessions likely affect countless thousands of individuals each year. And of course, he already talks about they're doing research on it, but they really haven't had a conclusion as to like causes and even really fully what's the best treatment on it. But as I know OCD, I know that ERP is very strong. It's a little harder when the compulsion is really thoughts and versus actions, but I still think it's possible. It can take something. But so it is, I think that it is something that is treatable. I'm not going to say curable. OCD is one I don't think is necessarily what I would call curable. I think it's very manageable, and I think this falls in line with that. It can be very it can play a role in our lives. This same thing, being obsessive like that, really can mess with our lives, and so we really want to be able to get treatment. And I do believe that the ERP is our best treatment for this. So again, something to think about. I hope that this will help you out in some way, shape, or form. And I do ask it, I'd love to hear some comments. I would love to, if you go to the invisiblewheelchair.com, you can leave a comment there where this is posted. I would love to hear from you. So anyway, I hope this has helped. So keep tapping and keep thriving through life. Take care. That concludes this podcast. Please leave me a comment or question below. That gives me good direction where to go on future podcasts. I would love to hear your invisible wheelchair stories if you're willing to share it. If you would, go to invisiblewheelchair.com and click on Tell Your Story. I want to remind you that OCD, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, is treatable, and I can help you get past OCD. So, if you have heard this podcast and others, and you feel like you need further assistance and would like to spend some time with me working through any issues you have, then feel free to book a session at focusedhealthyfamily.com or familyocd.com, or you can call me at 704-562-1630. I also offer $85 off initial discovery session if you mention that you heard it on this podcast. Finally, don't forget that there is a tapping recording that coincides with this podcast you may want to take advantage of. I hope you have enjoyed this podcast and will join me for the next one. Remember to keep tapping, talking, and transcending your life to new heights. Thank you, and have a great day.